Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Broadway Lincoln Area Mobility Improvements virtual meeting. We will be getting started shortly. Let's just wait a couple minutes so that people start rolling in, but we just didn't want to leave you waiting in the virtual waiting area. In the interim, let's play some music while we wait. Thank you. All right. Let's just give it one more minute or so that we can let folks in, slowly trickle in. Thank you. All right, we are 2 minutes in, a little La La Land, sunshine music, even though it's about to snow on us. But welcome to today's virtual meeting where we are providing you updates about all the awesome projects that are taking place in the area of Broadway, Lincoln, I-25, up to Spear area. So we have an entire team behind the scenes that is ready to share some information, some project updates for folks. And if we don't mind going to the next slide, please. All right, so as always, a little bit of the orientation. Please, throughout the presentation, please click on the bottom of your screen. You should see sort of that little chat function. Please feel free to enter your questions through there. So that the team can be able to answer it. Again, the behind the scenes team will be able to take your questions, assign them to the right recipient, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you answers. If you can, obviously a lot of these presentations will have a lot of graphics. So if you want to expand your screen to make it easier for you to see what's going on. Of course, because this is a virtual meeting, you just saw my dog Coco jump on my lap and then he just ran off again. So, obviously you might hear, noises, see doggies and a whole lot of other stuff. So please forgive us. If you are having, technical issues with not being able to answer questions or anything like that, jump off and jump back on. Usually that solves most of the problems that are out there. Participants are muted. We are expecting a relatively large crowd today. So that obviously everybody, stays afloat, but the chat is definitely open. After each project presents, we're going to have about 5 minutes of Q&A. about that particular project, and then a very large chunk of Q&A at the very end of this meeting. So please, if you have questions, start typing them away. Don't wait until the presentation is done if you just have those general questions about the project. And then if you saw a question that pops up about a project that has already passed or that has already presented, just label it at the beginning of your question. You know, this is for the Broadway cycle track, for the Lincoln Transit, so that it's easier a little bit for us to understand what of which questions you're asking for what project. Next slide. So again, the purpose of this meeting is just to provide all of you with a general update about what's happening in all of the big projects that are taking place, basically in the Baker, West Wash, Lincoln, Broadway area. And today, so we have the South Broadway multimodal, which is the protected bikeway, as a lot of people sort of refer to. Then, then we're going to have Mike Harmer speak and Broadway multimodal project that's on the southern end of the corridor, obviously right at the I-25 interchange. Then the Lincoln Transit team is going to speak about the Vision Zero and the transit improvements that are taking place on Lincoln. And then we're going to wrap things up with the South Central Community Transportation Networks, which is sort of the bigger bikeway projects that create that east-west connection and how they overlap with these projects. So this is our lovely project team. We have a variety of folks here today. Obviously, I'm Gaby Cerrado. I am your moderator. I will be doing the Q&A segment and asking your questions on your behalf. We have, let's go around actually really quickly and by the sequence so you can hear from our project managers. James.
Good evening. My name is James Colbert. I'm with the Dottie Transportation Build Group, and I'm currently the project manager for the South Broadway Multimodal Project.
My name is Matt Zerkowski with Kimley Horn Associates. I'm the deputy project manager on the engineering side for the South Broadway Multimodal Project.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miles Graham. I'm doing community engagement for the South Broadway Bikeway Project.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Harmer. I'm with the Denver Department of Transportation Infrastructure. I'm the project manager for Broadway and I-25.
Good evening. My name is Brett Boncory. I'm the design PM in the Transportation Design Group of Dottie for the Lincoln Transit and Safety Enhancements Project.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Mendez. I'm a planner within Dottie, and I led the Lincoln Transit and Safety Enhancements planning phase, and now working with Brett on kind of the implementation and design phase.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Ellen Vorhofer, and I'm with Dottie. I'm the project manager for the South Central Community Transportation Network.
Awesome. So this is a really fabulous team, and we've been working very hard, to collaborate with each other so that our projects obviously make sense as we move into the actual construction of these. And then we have a variety of folks behind the scenes that will be able to answer potentially those technical questions that you might have. Bryce Hammerton, Barbara Stockland from CDOT, Dan Merritt, Kaylee Showers, Jean Shilley, and Brian Valentine. So thank you so much for the staff, actually for my team to be able to talk for 2 hours about your projects. Next slide. And so we are going to kick it off with one of the main projects, exciting projects that we have on the line. So I'm going to kick it off to Miles so that we can talk about the South Broadway multimodal. Mr. Miles.
Thanks, Gabby. And before we dive into the final design on the Broadway Bikeway, and we can go to the next slide, let's take a moment just to look at some polling data to provide some high-level context for the transformative nature for these types of projects, particularly as it relates to high comfort bikeways. As you'll see here, there's a small portion of the population, roughly 15% or so, who are generally confident riding their bicycles in these types of facilities. As you can see, that number grows much more to interested but concerned when we're talking about a high comfort bikeway. Moreover, that number grows to 75%, and those reservations are alleviated when that high comfort bikeway is connected to a network of bikeways that allow people to get to their destinations on those high comfort facilities without gaps in that network. And on the next slide, we can take a look at a little bit of the why and how these types of facilities prevent some of those risky situations that create conflicts between cyclists and other modes of transportation, particularly dooring issues and any conflicts as folks are turning and parking their vehicles, and providing a separated space for all roadway users that balances the right of way for folks driving, folks riding their bikes, folks taking transit, walking and rolling. And the benefits of those really translate to safety, comfort, increased utilization of those facilities, and allowing people the option to have choice in how they travel the city. And on the next slide, as we take it down to the local level at the project specific standpoint for the Broadway Bikeway from the Cherry Creek Trail roughly to Broadway Station, you'll see that those benefits and goals are aligned in prioritizing safety, prioritizing an efficient and connected network that allows choice in how folks move around, and prioritizing community collaboration. And as you'll see on the next slide, the discussion on this segment of Broadway has been ongoing for quite some time. There's a whole host of different touch points that we've had with you over the years. I have to admit a little bit of sentimentality when I see our last public event in late 2019 at Voodoo Donut, where we gathered a lot of great donuts and design input that transformed how we were designing the project, and some of the highlights we're going to go through on the next slide. Lex, you can go forward one more. So what we heard and how, let's go back one more. Let's take a look at sort of what we heard from the community, how it informs the design process, and what we heard throughout the community and how it was integrated into the final design you're going to see tonight. Throughout our conversations with the community, we heard that a concrete curb was the preferred buffer type for the parking protected bikeway, and that was the #1 mobility benefit identified by the community. So in the final design, you're going to see it's a parking protected concrete curb facility. And on the next slide, we asked how is the community wanting to connect to the Cherry Creek Trail and making that connection into really the bike super highway through Denver down Cherry Creek Trail and along Spear Boulevard. The community indicated a preference for connecting to Cherry Creek Trail from the Broadway Bikeway through the plaza on the south side of Cherry Creek, and that's what the design you'll see tonight will show. And on the next slide, we heard that obviously safety was a key priority for this project. And so in the final design, you'll see intersections that have more visibility and are opened up to improve safety. You'll also see design features like the hardened center line shown here that create a slower, more controlled turning movement that prioritize safety for folks in the crosswalk. And on the next slide, you'll see a pedestrian refuge that also prioritizes safety and effectively shortens the crossing distance of Broadway. So in the current conditions, when you're making that trip across the entire lane of Broadway, it can be an uncomfortable experience. With the new design, you'll be able to cross the bikeway and the parking lane and then pause before you complete your journey across Broadway, which makes it for a much shorter distance that's much more comfortable for all pedestrians, especially those who are differently abled. And as you'll see on the next slide, all of the intersections that will be reconstructed to make them fully accessible and improve accessibility for all pedestrians. Next slide. We also heard that bike signals were very important, and upgrading all of the traffic signals throughout the corridor will be part of this effort to make sure that for folks who are riding their bike, for folks who are walking, and for folks who are driving, it's a very clear and protected turning movement that takes place at all intersections. And on the next slide, you'll see how local access, which was prioritized by the community, is addressed. And in the future presentations you'll hear tonight, how we connect to Broadway Station, the east-west connectivity to the community transportation networks projects will all tie into this facility. And on Broadway, protected left turns with those new signals we just saw will help to make that intersection interaction much safer throughout the corridor. And with that, I'm going to flip it to Matt Chakowski to walk us through the design process.
Yeah, thanks. So to understand where we're going, it's really important to take a quick look back at where we've been. So I wanted to do a quick recap of how we've progressed from the conceptual 30% design to where we are today at 90% approaching final plans. When we started at 30% design, we were just getting an understanding of the corridor and looking to determine how much space we had and what we could do with it. Our goal at this phase of the project was really just to determine how we could provide the best, safe, and functional corridor for all of our users. As we progressed towards our 60% design, the improvements on the corridor really began to take shape as we determined the specific placement and development of key project elements. So at the intersections, these elements included the preliminary traffic signal equipment locations, paving improvements like ADA curb ramps, sidewalks, bulb outs, and the associated drainage improvements. And then along the corridor, it was really determining what the proposed buffer type is and how is that really going to be applied and installed in the field. Looking at the curb lane use, it was really just determining what are the locations of all of the loading zones going to be, where are we looking at on-street parking, and what site triangles are necessary to analyze to make sure that we have safety for those spaces. As we progress towards our 90% design, we worked through all the intricate design details of all of those elements I just described and got them to a point where they're shovel ready for construction in our plans. From this stage of the project through final submittal, the team is going to continue to coordinating with the city on cost estimates, coordinating with public and private utilities as needed, and preparing for the bidding and construction of the project. So let's go ahead and jump forward to a couple of the key project elements that we'd like to highlight. So as everybody knows, the corridor has a variety of, you can go to the next one, perfect. As everybody knows, the corridor has a variety of context and land uses, going all the way from center up to Spear. As we get towards the northern end of the corridor, we really just wanted to hone in on an area that includes some of Denver's most high-profile transportation facilities. So that's Broadway, Spear, 6th Avenue, and the Cherry Creek Trail. Our approach in designing this area of the corridor was really to provide a safe, comfortable, easy, and intuitive connection for people walking and bicycling along Broadway, while still providing mobility for motorists that are going through the project area. The existing pedestrian plaza between Broadway and Lincoln is going to be utilized to provide a connection to the Cherry Creek Trail, like Miles referenced. On this slide, the orange arrows represent the path that people will take who are walking to the trail, and the green arrows represent the path that people will take who are going to be bicycling, separated by the pedestrian plaza there. Wanted to also highlight the 7th Avenue connection. 7th Avenue is proposed to be a bicycle facility starting at Broadway and continuing to the east. The planning and design of this bicycle facility is going to be completed through a parallel city project called the Community Transportation Networks, which Ellen will speak about in just a little bit. The current concept for 7th Avenue includes a two-way cycle track on the south side of 7th Avenue. And the proposed connection between the two cycle tracks is shown with the red arrow on the slide that you can see here. The design details for the 7th Avenue bicycle facility are still being developed and refined through that community transportation network process. However, our two project teams are coordination going forward to ensure that there's a smooth connection provided. The last thing that we wanted to highlight at this area of the project is the 6th Avenue intersection. So as everybody knows, 6th Avenue provides a critical connection coming into town from the west, as well as leaving town, coming down Broadway and accessing Spear. Our approach to this intersection was to make sure that we're able to include dual southbound left turn lanes. This allows us to match the existing configuration of the roadway and maximize traffic flow and operations through the area. So let's jump to the next slide as we go a little bit further down the corridor. So we're looking here at Ellsworth and Irvington. So these intersections are fairly representative of the improvements at the signalized intersections along the corridor. As we talked about a little bit earlier, each of these signalized intersections that are existing today are going to be reconstructed with brand new traffic signals, paving improvements, drainage improvements, and safety improvements as well. On this slide, you can see the paving improvements that are shown with the black line work and hatching. Kind of gives you an idea of what the proposed footprint of the intersection will look like. And then additionally, the pedestrian refuge islands are shown in orange on the bottom of the of your screen there. Most of the signalized intersections along the corridor include passenger loading zones. Throughout the project, our team reviewed the locations of all the existing on-street parking and the existing loading zones. And then we coordinated with the city to determine the appropriate locations of these curb uses. The proposed locations are based off of safety, the context of the corridor, and an attempt to develop a pattern to help with user expectations, looking for loading zones along the corridor. The Irvington intersection that you can see on the right side of your screen here is one of 2 T intersections along the corridor. At these intersections and all of them, the bulb outs were removed from the east side of the intersection to allow bicycles to stay on the curb, and so that they didn't have to mix with traffic at the intersections. Our goal with this was to reduce the conflicts with vehicles and reduce the intersection footprint, help reduce speeds, and manage crossing distances of the intersection. As you can see on this slide, much of the Irvington intersection is being reconstructed. This will impact the existing rainbow crosswalk at the intersection. We understand that this is a cultural icon along the corridor, and we're taking this into consideration with our project planning and design, or coordinating with the city moving forward for options for what we can do with that improvement. The next slide kind of jumps down to our far southern limits of the project at Center Avenue. What I really wanted to highlight here is that our team has been coordinating with our public and private partners at this area, ultimately to provide a connection to the I-25 and Broadway project, and then ultimately down to the Broadway station. Mike Harmer will talk about this a little bit more with his part of the presentation a little bit. James?
Thanks, Matt. So next slide, please. So placemaking throughout the South Broadway corridor is going to be primarily through public art installations. So public art for this project is a separate but collaborative effort with our Denver Arts and Venues group. And so they're underway and working together, to get out and try to time it as best they can with our construction. Obviously, we won't install any installation until after any art installations until after construction, but we want to plan for it so we can reduce any rework and get any utilities or lighting or anything like that. We need it installed with South Broadway construction. So they issued an RFP for artists, and they got a really robust response with 182 artists that responded to the request. We had a committee of local representation that included local artists, 2 maintenance districts along the project corridor, the local council office, and a community representation that selected Jamie Paulus from Indianapolis, who's really known for her kind of whimsical signs, to be the artist for this project. Now, as far as like the number of installations that we're going to have on the project, that's going to depend on final budget numbers and things like that. But we're anticipating somewhere between 5 and 8 different installations throughout the corridor. And we're going to be working together with the arts and venue and the artists to find the most appropriate and safe locations for those along the corridor, and make sure that they're just placed in a thoughtful location. And so they'll be highly visible and enhance the placemaking and enhance the public space for those using the corridor. And so, yeah, so we anticipate those to be installed with construction, which will likely take place in 2022 after we determine all those final details, whether it's lighting, not lighting, all the other specifics associated with that. Next slide. So where are we going, right? Some people mentioned before, we've been looking at this corridor for quite some time, since earliest back in 2015, which included our early test bikeway along Broadway. And we use that to gather some data and kind of inform the programs to move forward, right? So essentially what that is a concept of 2 different programs for Broadway. First, a north segment, which would be a protected bike lane from Spear up to Civic Center Station. And so that project is still in the concept stage at this point of design, and it's waiting for funding to then finalize design and ultimately implement the project. The south segment, which is our project we've been talking about and what we call the South Broadway multimodal project, we're closing in on, we're in the final design phase right now. We anticipate to have our final designs wrapped up by mid-year in summertime. And then after that, we'll kind of begin what we call our pre-construction efforts, which essentially is going to be right-of-way or land acquisition, which for this project is going to consist of acquiring temporary easements to make sidewalk and ADA connections. Broadway is an older corridor, so some of the land ownership, it's not a pretty straight line. It kind of jumps around a lot, and so we have to get small little areas, get permission to provide a smooth transition and smooth construction for our sidewalk and ADA. And as I said, so once we wrap up the pre-construction efforts, then we'll go into actual construction, and we anticipate that to kick off in 2022. Next slide. And so, if you want to see more information about the project, we have a project website here, and we've got a bit.ly link that makes it a little easier for you. And then if you have any specific questions that you might think of later or would like to ask, you can email us at denvermovesbroadway@denvergov.org, and somebody from the project team will respond to you. And with that, next slide. We have any, now we have some.
Now we're opening it up to questions, and our 5:55, look at that, right on the dot. That is pretty amazing. Thank you. Thank you for Broadway. So we do have tons of questions. Thank you so much for asking them. I'm going to try to hit as many as we can. Obviously we are a little bit limited at the beginning. So several questions about basically the alignment, going back to sort of the original concept design. And thankfully we have Brett here, who was actually also part of the design team prior to James. James is on the build side of things. Brett is on design. So, Larissa asked, Broadway, the bike lane, why is there a two-way bikeway on a one-way street with opposing traffic? And obviously a park road, of cars. Under the same token, there was another question from Rover Greer, who asked, why not put this facility on Sherman? So I guess they're asking sort of about the general, how was Broadway identified as, as for this type of facility? And I guess a little bit of the difference of what is the difference about the different, what is so unique about the Broadway's protected bikeway that it's best fit for Broadway? Brett, if you don't mind, or I'm not sure if somebody from Miles or from the team can answer.
Sure. Yeah, Miles and the team, feel free to chime in here, but I'll just say, first off, the protection that's going in on Broadway is probably our highest level of protection and PBL, with it having, like was mentioned earlier, the concrete buffer with the parking on the other side. It provides a significant buffer from that traffic. It is two-way and it is on Broadway. This is primarily due to that that's where the destination, a lot of the destinations are, right? It kind of accomplishes that first and last block access issue that we have to all the businesses and restaurants on Broadway. Thankfully, and you'll hear a lot about Ellen's project later, that's accomplishing a lot of the east-west connections into Broadway and even parallel to Broadway. But that's primarily why it's focused on Broadway. I will say with the PBL, what comes along with that is that all of the intersections that are signalized will have dedicated phases, and so provides quite a bit. Again, our highest level of safety on a bikeway, where the bikeway is not separated from traffic in space, but it's also time. The bikes will have space to go when the cars are not. And then a bikeway in Sherman. So it's not necessarily this or the other. If a bikeway was on Sherman, it would likely, just as a note, it would likely be a neighborhood bikeway, and that would be sharing with the road, which, but that's just kind of just a note to add on to the end. But I don't know if the team has anything else to add to that.
Just for the sake, I think you provided a pretty good answer, and just for the sake of answering a couple more questions, because we only have like 2 more minutes. general questions, Al, you asked, are the bus lines being eliminated on Broadway? That's a no. We're continuing this project, obviously it's for the bikeway, and then it's also is maintaining that dedicated bus lane on the far west side of the corridor. We also have for a question from our Amanda, are the new signals going to have prioritized PET signals, LPIs, lead pedestrian intervals on it? Brett, I think, or James, will you be, I believe that at this time we are?
Yeah, actually, funny enough, so most of the Broadway intersections were given LPIs already. If they haven't been constructed yet, they will be very soon. So, or implemented, they will be very soon.
Awesome. How will, do we have a maintenance already sort of established? Obviously, one of the concerns is during snow or if somebody hits them, they just follow our, first of all, for the snow removal, just like in downtown, they will be, these facilities will be added to as a regular maintenance to sweep them, just like we do in downtown. And then for the maintenance, it will be maintained, by DOTI. Anything else, all the elements, basically between the curb lines will be maintained by DOTI, just like a regular road. And so it's the same process, for that. Obviously, if you do, it would, like any infrastructure that is out there, if you see an issue with a curb or anything like that, please submit it to 311 so that our crews can go out there and be able to fix it. Let's just take one more question. Well, there's a couple of questions, particularly about trees and whether this project will be adding trees to as it's being built. James, will you be able to answer that?
Sure, yeah. So currently the project is not anticipating adding any new trees, though we are looking and considering making the existing trees there better, right? If you've kind of been along the corridor, you can see a lot of them have very small tree enclosures, and we're talking about a concept what we call free the tree, which basically brings them up to our current standards, which is a 15-foot long, 5-foot wide planter to give the tree roots a lot more room and the trees to grow and become more healthy. Gabby, you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you. So, we definitely continue to have questions and we'll try to answer them, all of them as best as we can. But right now for, to respect everybody's time, let's go ahead and start with the I-25 and Broadway project with Mike Harmer. Mr. Mike.
Thank you, Gabby. As Gabby said, this is the I-25 and Broadway project. Next slide. And so just to give you a bit of an overview of the project, this project began with the EA that was completed in 2008. During that time, there was a lot of community input and evaluation of various different concepts on how to make the project work. The result of that was the preferred alternative that is presented in the EA, which reconstructed Broadway from essentially Arizona down to Exposition, reconfigured a number of the other street networks, and added a new on-ramp to southbound I-25. In doing so, we're improving safety, multimodal connectivity, improving the roadway, drainage, and water quality infrastructure, as well as adding some streetscape elements. With the implementation of the project, you probably heard 2008. Oh, that's a long time. Due to funding constraints, the city has been chopping away this project for a number of years, but it's a phased implementation. Later on in the presentation, you'll see a trolley track mitigation interpretation element that we're incorporating into the project. Next slide. So this is, one of the goals of the project is to reduce the number of accidents. You can see from this list that over the last 5 years, there have been around 203 accidents that have occurred at various intersections within the project area. Next slide. So our goal here is to further work towards the city's goal of reducing deaths and serious injuries to zero by 2030. We're doing that by reconfiguring some of these high crash intersections, rehabilitating and improving sidewalks, upgrading curb ramps to meet ADA criteria, adding shared use paths for both bikes and peds, and finally, extending the Broadway protected bikeway from Center to Exposition to connect into the network that we'll be providing as a part of this project. Next. So when you think about the project, I just briefly mentioned that it's a phased implementation. What you don't see on this screen is the project that was completed in 2017, which reconstructed Broadway from Kentucky south to Arizona and made some improvements to Mississippi between Logan and the CML. What you see on this screen is basically 3 phases. The first phase, that's in this light blue color, that is focused on the reconstruction of Exposition between Broadway and Lincoln, the extension of Exposition to the west, and some minor widening of Broadway from Exposition to about midway between Exposition and Ohio. That project is currently under construction and is slated to be completed in May of this year. What our focus is right now is the area that you see in that salmon color, salmon and red. With that, we're reconstructing Broadway from Kentucky down to about midway between Ohio and Exposition. We're constructing the new on-ramp to I-25. This is somewhat quite a bit different than the existing on-ramp where you make a left from southbound Broadway to get onto I-25 in the southbound direction. Instead, you're going to make a right from Broadway, go under the interstate where the ramp will go up and over Broadway and tie into this I-25 at approximately the same location it does today. With that, we're reconstructing a couple of different accesses. On the north side, that'll be via Exposition and then the Bannock leg. And then second, we're consolidating Kentucky with the off-ramp intersection to eliminate one of the signals that's there that causes a lot of accidents. Next slide. So I talked briefly earlier that, we're providing a number of sidewalk and multi-use path connections. That's what we're indicating here. We have several different colors. Those represented in the light blue color or the darker blue color. Those are the sidewalks that are going in. And then in the green color, you can see a number of multi-use paths that we're providing to connect into the station. So the result of that is a number of different points that the public can use to access the station. On the southern end of the project, note that once the redevelopment of the former gate site comes online, there will also be another connection via, I think it's Market Street or Marketplace, that'll carry people through that development down to about Tennessee, where they can cross Broadway and connect to a regional trail. Next slide. So this is a schedule that illustrates, where we've been and where we're going. As I mentioned before, the EA was completed back in 2008. Then we moved on and we completed the segment 1 and segment 2 of the project. That was the Broadway from Kentucky to Arizona and Mississippi stretch. Then earlier this year, we awarded the Exposition Avenue construction, which is due to be done in May. This year, we plan on finishing up the design of the salmon color or the interchange area, and we anticipate construction to occur sometime in 2022 with an anticipated completion in 2025. Next slide. So here's just a few pictures of the construction that's ongoing right now. These are pictures of East Exposition between Broadway and Lincoln. It shows pictures of the roadway reconstruction. It's gone from asphalt to concrete. Then we've also reconstructed a number of the sidewalks and pedestrian ramps in the area. Next slide. The project is constructing storm sewer infrastructure, putting in new signals at both the Broadway and Lincoln intersections with Exposition, and installing some street side stormwater planters to improve water quality. Next slide. So this is a rendering of what the future project will look like. You can see from these orange arrows, that new on-ramp comes out from under I-25, goes up and over Broadway where it ties in to the existing ramp on I-25. This gives you an indication of how the off-ramp intersection and the Kentucky intersection are now combined. It shows how at some point in the future, what the future loop ramp will look like. And so it's a visual representation of what you can expect. What really isn't shown clear on here are the multitude of ped and bike paths that we're providing with the project. Next slide. One thing I didn't mention on that previous slide was that we're planning on building a parking lot in the interior of the new on-ramp. There will be a crossing into that on-ramp that goes under the new on-ramp and the existing off-ramp. So these are pictures of that access. As you can see from this, the opening is fairly wide. It provides a clear separation for pedestrians to access that parking area and vehicles to go in and out. And the next slide will show the view from the other direction. Next slide. So I mentioned briefly that one of the things that we're doing as a part of the project is installing a historic mitigation element. We're incorporating that into the project. This element has to give site-specific references to the transportation history of the corridor and incorporate that into a higher traffic area that will engage people more than just a sign. Many of you, I think, have been at the Broadway and I-25 station. On the southern end of that, or the southern end of the platform, there is an existing sign that characterizes some historic items. And I'm not sure that, that gets a whole lot of attention anymore. Next slide. So what are we planning on doing? What's presented here is the site concept. The plan here is at the intersection of a couple of the wider walkways to install a textured sidewalk that inlays brick pavers to mimic the old trolley lines. That's what you see by these lines that are in the center of the sidewalk. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and that'll give you more of a 3D rendering of what that is anticipated to look like. It will include, some interpretive signage, which will discuss the relevance of the historic trolley tracks, or the historic trolley, not just the tracks, how they contributed to the area, how they moved people and goods around, how it provided access to the former Gates rubber plant site a long time ago. It'll be it'll look like more of a plaza area where people can sit and congregate. There's benches, there's small walls, there's additional pedestrian scale lighting for safety. So that's what we're planning on moving forward with in the design. Next slide. This is another rendering, more of a close-up view to some of the signs, the interpretive elements. Largely they're panels on top of, I-beams with nearby seating. Next slide. So with that, thought I'd see if you guys have any questions. I think I'm just a
You're
minute
sure?
under my time.
There you go. Look at this. I am loving this team. We were a little concerned that we were not going to have enough time. All right. Yes, Mr. Mike, we do have several questions for you. First of all, from John, what is the total price tag on the interchange project?
The total cost of the interchange, well, given that it's a phased implementation, it's hard to give you a specific number. As I mentioned before, the entire project began basically, where the construction of it began in 2015. So overall, it's probably in the range of $100 million.
Okay. And that is, obviously includes local funding, then also the, state and then federal funding, correct?
That is correct. The city has been successful in obtaining a number of grants through DRCOG. Those monies come from FHWA in terms of a federal grant. Those grants, are project specific. They were awarded based upon essentially a competitive process.
I guess another question, can you somebody go back to the map that also shows the reconstruction of the sidewalks and the multi-use paths? We have a question from Brittany saying, there doesn't seem to be an easy or direct path across Broadway from Lincoln, Ohio. It will be a high-use corridor for people accessing the RTD station. How will you make it easier for people to walk and bike there? So if we don't mind going back a few slides, so we can show, and maybe we just, we obviously.
Yeah, it's probably back about 5 slides.
Yeah. It was one of the maps, the overall map. More. That one, right? Or is that one, is that it, Mike?
Yeah, that is it. And so, this is an area that's still under development. What you see on here are the improvements that are largely associated with the Salmon Color project, or phase 2. We do plan on widening the facilities on the north side of Ohio. Once the final phase of the project comes in, you'll see even more connectivity for bikes and peds. One of the things that we are doing at this location, and many of you probably already know this, is that the existing Ohio and Lincoln intersection is currently unsignalized. We are putting in a signal which will make it safer and easier for peds and bikes to cross. But this intersection will continue to evolve over time.
In this slide, there's a lot of discussion, obviously, as expected, about the green area, segment 4. That's the 800 block. We have, can you share with everybody the status of segment 4? And on the chat itself, I guess go a little bit over sort of what the original EA sort of called for segment 4, and then the general status, if you don't mind, Mike.
Well, the EA called for the reconstruction of that existing loop ramp. During the EA process, it was determined that existing on-ramp is substandard. As I think I mentioned previously, that part of the project is currently unfunded. So we don't have a specific timeline for the implementation of that phase of the project. I do think it's relatively safe to say, given that our focus is on the large salmon part of the project, that it's probably not a focus of the team to move forward with that before the project is done in 2025.
And we also have a couple of questions. We have about 2 more minutes, but originally back when we were still presenting on the Broadway cycle track, protected bikeway, John asked, basically sort of about that last mile of what's, the connectivity issues that a lot of projects do seem to have about addressing the last mile. In the Broadway cycle, in the Broadway protected bikeway on the north end, we're matching with CTN South Central on 7th Avenue. And on the south side here, Mike, you will be extending. Right now, the cycle track is ending at Center, but this project will be extending that protected bikeway for one more block to Exposition. Is that correct?
That is correct. And then the intent is for folks either to keep going on a wider path on Broadway or migrate into the station via a multi-use path on West Exposition and Bannock. And then there's other connections once Gates comes online with whatever that redevelopment looks like to complete the connection on the other side of the station.
And we are at 6:20, but let me take one more in. There was an anonymous commenter saying, why do you keep putting more lights in this project? Mike, would you mind talking a little bit about sort of the Vision Zero or the crashes that we're seeing right now in this area and why is that crucial to address them?
In terms of signals, I'm assuming that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. With signals, it has to do with progression of the traffic. That's one of the reasons why they're being put in, to make sure that we're reducing the congestion that currently exists along the corridor. I recognize that, we've got a couple of signals at Exposition that are going in, but keep in mind, that becomes essentially the new northern access into the station. So it has to have the ability to effectively move automobiles as well as transit through both of those intersections.
So we certainly still have questions and comments on the chat, but let's kick it off now to our Lincoln Transit team so that folks can see basically how then these improvements then help transit on the other side. Brett and Zach, if you don't mind taking it over.
Sure, yeah, I'll kick it off and then Brett will come in at various points throughout the presentation. So this project, the boundary of this project is shown here on the map. It's from Ohio to about Spear or 6th. It's shown to 7th here. That's where the bus lanes merge in, or not merge in, but become the 24-hour bus lanes that are present north of Spear, out of Spear Boulevard. So that's the bounds of this project on Lincoln. Next slide, please. These next few slides just kind of set the stage for where the project has been, and then also kind of sets the stage for kind of how the proposal, or how excuse me, I'm stumbling over my words. How the proposed alternative, came to be based on these factors. Oops, sorry, go back. So we heard a lot from the community about there being safety issues on the corridor. It doesn't feel safe to walk along Lincoln. Cars are going super fast. This is just an image of the crashes along the corridor. This represents hundreds of crashes over the last couple of years. It's only a data point. We have a lot more data, or data from you all and speed data that shows that this is a dangerous corridor. Additionally, Lincoln north of Alameda is got high injury. It's on our high injury network, so it's one of the 5% of streets in Denver that has over 50% of our traffic injuries and deaths. Next slide. Transit along this corridor. Lincoln and Broadway together as they act as one corridor since they're both one ways. Third most used transit corridor in Denver. This may remain true today. I don't know if it's still third. It may potentially be still at third, because I don't know if anyone has ridden the Zero lately. There's a lot of folks on it, so much so that I think this is one of the corridors that RTD has actually been increasing service on over through COVID. But then they've also brought the larger articulated buses to serve the demand along this corridor. So even now, when we're hearing that transit service is down, this corridor is still moving quite a good number of people. And the important thing on this slide too is the delays that the buses are seeing. So, upwards of 35% of their time along this stretch of Lincoln is spent in congestion, so just stuck. And that's primarily in those afternoon rush hours when the bus only lanes are not active. Next slide. This slide will come into play when we talk about what we're doing on the corridor, but the main takeaway here is just to notice, this is the vehicle traffic along the corridor, very peaky. So, you see these spikes kind of in the morning rush hour period and the afternoon rush hour period throughout the week. Saturday is kind of just like a blob of traffic throughout the day, as is Sunday, but not as high. So those peaks are really key because that's when the buses are getting stuck. Next slide. And then existing conditions with parking, and this will come back at the end. But currently, there's no spaces on the west side. There's approximately 247 spaces on the east side of the street between Ohio and 6th Avenue. And those are available, 22 hours a day on the weekdays, 24 hours a day on the weekends. The only time when you're not allowed to park there is that 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. period when the bus only lane is active. Next. And so what did we do with all of that information and all of the community input that we received? We'll start with talking about the safety improvements that are coming to the corridor, and Brett will go over those, and then I'll talk about how the street operation is changing and how that impacts transit traffic and parking. So Brett?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Your next slide. So yeah, as Zach mentioned, we took the opportunity to evaluate and design some lower cost Vision Zero improvements that could be installed with the transit improvements, which Zach will talk about in a moment. These improvements were determined as a direct result of our crash data analysis. We also did a Vision Zero walk audit that the team conducted, and then obviously the community feedback that we heard from you all. So kind of just as a reminder here, the public input we received really highlighted the speeding vehicles that are seen along Lincoln. That kind of leads to that highway feel through the neighborhood that we've heard a lot about. In addition, we heard that it feels dangerous to walk along and across Lincoln due to those high speeds and just the close sidewalk proximity to those speeding vehicles. So just want to get into the details now of some of those projects that will improve safety along the corridor. And they're kind of in 9 general categories of improvement that I'll kind of just whip through decently quick. So I apologize, it's going to get a little bit technical, but and when we get really excited about these things, but hopefully this will give a good understanding of what we're doing. So firstly, we wanted to mention that we have 2 traffic signals that are being installed along the corridor beginning this year. So that's Exposition and 5th Avenue intersections. These will include updated signal infrastructure, safe pedestrian crossings, and better visibility for all modes. As we mentioned in our last public meeting, actually, one of the most effective strategies for slowing down speeds on a multi-lane one-way arterial like Lincoln is speed management through the use of signal timing. So we're happy to report that in September of last year, we actually already retimed the signal progression along the corridor to slower speed in the off-peak hours to help mitigate that kind of high open road speeds that we see. While we did that, we also added some leading pedestrian intervals. So there was a question about that earlier on Broadway. We've installed those on Lincoln already, wherever possible. So this treatment's done, if you're not familiar with it, where we have motorist versus pedestrian safety concerns at signalized intersections so that the pedestrian receives time to begin crossing the roadway before cars are allowed to conduct their turning movements. And then these next few projects will be installed in spring, summer of this year, along with the transit enhancements. So as we walked the corridor, we noticed that there were some low-hanging fruit improvements in marking stop bars, the north-south crosswalks at these locations along the corridor, just to better provide clarity for pedestrians crossing north and south. And then at the Lincoln Alameda intersection, we had the opportunity to install what we call a paint and post pedestrian median refuge. There's a picture of it here of one that we recently installed on Colfax. That would be installed at Alameda and Lincoln. Next slide. So at 3 locations on the corridor, we saw that there's a need for daylighting. What this means is removing some of the parking spots near the corners in order to better establish better visibility for all the intersection users, whether it's a turning or crossing motorists, some people walking, people biking or rolling, and in some cases, allowing more space for motorist turning movements, like at Cedar Avenue, Lincoln and Cedar, where we are daylighting the intersection to provide more space for the RTD Route 3 to make its left turn there. Now there's 5 intersections along the corridor where we saw current or developing bike and pedestrian safety issues. So at these 2 locations, we have Dakota and 4th Ave, where we're actually evaluating traffic signals in the long term. We will be installing painted bulb outs to encourage slower turning speeds and improve safety for all users. An example of this is shown in the photo on the top right of the screen. This is also a Vision Zero project we did on Colfax pretty recently. And then at 2 of these locations, at Virginia and Ellsworth, we'll be installing painted bulb outs and hardened center lines. So these hardened center lines shown at the bottom, this is actually a photo from New York. They further encourage slower left turns and help to mitigate pedestrian bike versus left turn motorist crashes. Just a note, some of these will also be installed on the Broadway cycle track as well. And I'll have Zach talk more about this when he talks about the new operations of the street, but we will have 2 motorist travel lanes and parking on both sides during the nights and weekends. So that's, as you might have caught, that's obviously a huge change from what it is now. This leads to visual narrowing of the street. So decreasing that kind of highway feel. This also decreases the pedestrian exposure when you're crossing Lincoln going east-west. And it adds that vertical and more horizontal separation between vehicle and pedestrian space during the times of the week where we have the highest pedestrian activity. So those are the times when our nights and weekends when people are home and are working from, walking to and from the amazing destinations along South Broadway and South Lincoln. And lastly, we're evaluating additional signals which will have controlled pedestrian crossings at both Dakota and 4th Avenue intersections. So due to COVID-19 conditions, we're kind of still there. We've not been able to evaluate these, but so while the other improvements I've mentioned are short-term and will be installed this year, these 2 projects, the warrant studies are more long-term in nature due to the longer lead time. So I'll turn it back over to Zach to chat more about the street operations.
Thanks, Brett. So now, yeah, we'll talk through the street operations, talk through the changes that are coming for transit, for the traffic, and for the parking. We wanted to lead with safety because I think that was the biggest piece that we heard during our community feedback. Of course, this started with needing to get the buses kind of unstuck in those afternoon periods. But we were able to incorporate a lot of safety improvements for that I think is going to be a great addition to this project. But now for kind of these other pieces of the project, I'll show some of the community feedback that we heard, how we turn those into solutions, also bringing in that data that we had talked about earlier, and then we'll walk through what the corridor will look like during the day. So in terms of transit, we kind of heard this, dichotomy of we don't need a 24-hour bus lane. Most of the folks who said that were still understood the need for expanding that bus only lane hours. So they were suggesting peak only or just in the middle of the day, things like that. And then there were, almost an equal number of folks who were wanting a 24-hour bus lane. They felt that it was needed on Broadway or on Lincoln, excuse me, just like it is on Broadway, right, currently. But there was pretty clear consensus that it not be a 7-day condition. So when we started this outreach, we were just presenting ideas just as they are, just 7-day conditions. And then how we're moving this forward based on this feedback, we are doing a peak hour bus only lane. So from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So in line with what currently occurs on the corridor. And then again, from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. when we're seeing the biggest delay in that afternoon peak period. And it will be weekdays only. The traffic conditions just didn't kind of warrant, nor did the service warrant the weekdays being blocked off for buses only in that easternmost lane. In terms of traffic, we had a lot of comments saying, please reduce the number of lanes on Lincoln. It's a highway. It's people are speeding. It's dangerous. we heard almost an equal number of people saying, please don't reduce any lanes on Lincoln. We need all of them to get all the cars through, all the buses through, everyone through. But there was a pretty clear message to reduce speeding along the corridor. So Brett talked about some of the ways that we're doing that through retiming the signals, the visual narrowing by having parking on both sides in those evening and weekend periods when we're seeing the highest speeds along the corridor. But in addition to that, we're able, well, I mean, not in addition, I guess that kind of is the solution there. It's just reducing those lanes overnight and during the weekends when the volumes are lower and we're seeing those higher speeds and more dangerous conditions. And then in terms of parking, we heard a lot about parking. Again, when we first started this outreach, we kind of had a range of options on the table that we wanted feedback on. One of them did include taking all of the parking off of Lincoln to have a bus only lane and then keep the 3 general purpose lanes. So we heard a lot about, not taking away parking from Lincoln, heard a lot about concern about midday parking for deliveries and services, concern about potential overflow parking from the Broadway businesses, folks parking to go to the Broadway businesses, and then concern that if parking was taken off of Lincoln, there would be a lot of overflow onto streets like Sherman and Grant. And so what we're doing about that, we are maintaining the overnight parking on the east side of the street, so where it currently exists, both overnight and during the midday period. So that 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. period where the bus only lane is not active, you can park in that lane. You can have the plumber who needs to come fix something, park there. UPS can park there. The mailman or mail delivery people. We're also going to introduce parking on the west side overnight. And so that's where that visual narrowing comes in those overnight conditions and over the weekends to have that buffer, reduce that crossing distance when there's parking on both sides. Next slide. So now this is how the street will operate through the day. The solutions on the right-hand side of the screen are the same that we just walked through in the previous slides. So AM peak period, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. This is how the corridor currently functions, or how the street currently functions, 3 drive lanes and a bus only lane. Once 9 a.m. hits, next slide, please. That bus only lane turns into a parking lane. So again, this is the same condition that you all are pretty familiar with currently on the corridor. Through that midday period, once 3 p.m. hits, next slide, then that parking lane becomes a bus only lane again. So we'll have our right-of-way enforcement, clear any cars that are parked there so the buses can start moving at 3 p.m. Next slide. And then overnight, you see both lanes on both ends, maybe switch back and then forth again, just so folks can see. So that drive lane on the west side, go forward, turns into a parking lane, as does that east side bus lane. So then there's 2 drive lanes in the middle, and then, kind of that buffer of parking on either side. And that condition remains the same, next slide, over the weekends as well. So the weekend condition would begin at 7 p.m. on Friday when the bus line ends through 6 a.m. Monday morning when the bus line starts again. Next. So what does all this do? It does increase our transit only lane hours by 250%, right, from 10 hours to 35 hours, getting those buses through in their most congested periods. And it does add parking to the corridor, which many folks were concerned about. So it does add, about 92%, and 92% increase in parking. There's just a few less spaces available on that west side of the street than there currently are on the east side. To Brett's conversation about safety earlier, I think 11 intersections improved. So that's pretty great. Next slide. Oh, Brett, this is you.
Yeah, so this slide, you don't worry about reading this slide. It's a little detailed. This is the nitty-gritty detailed design. I have this up here just to say we're in the home stretch. Detailed design has been done, and which we used in-house staff to do, which is a little uncommon for these types of projects. But we've wrapped that up, and we're now procuring construction. So definitely pleased to report that. We can go to the next slide. That kind of shows a timeline of where we've been and where we are. Zach kind of went through a lot of this. So yeah, we're in the implementation phase. Like I said, right now, we're moving this forward to construction. We are literally in the process of contracting or procuring a contractor to make this happen. So we're thinking, depending on weather, depending on some nitty-gritty administrative stuff in the background, we're thinking spring or summer of this year is when we'll be constructing this. So those of you who live along the corridor should have probably already started seeing construction notifications. And then during construction, you can expect that there will be some minor disruption in travel near the construction zone for sure, but these disruptions that will be communicated beforehand to make sure that everyone's aware of that. So that's all we had. Thanks, everyone.
Right. And we have a lot of questions. There is very much an interesting discussion happening on chat right now. Actually, and sort of let's, okay, so will the traffic signal, will there be transit signal priority along the corridor, Brett or Zach?
No, not with this project. Currently, the signals are pre-timed, and the cycles come, I believe, every 90 seconds. So no, not at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not at this time with this one. The other, so I guess obviously we had a lot of discussion on the chat regarding adding the on-street parking during those off peaks when obviously when it's a desire, there's a lot of desire out there by the community of like, yes, let's prioritize, let's actually do pets, transit, bicycles over cars and so forth. So, and I guess this is a little bit how it relates to those two projects, because on the one side, on the Broadway protected bikeway side, there is going to be, in order to build the bikeway, there's going to be sort of that on-street parking impact for the merchants and so forth. But then on the other token on Lincoln, this project is adding sort of that capacity during those off-peak, non-peak times during travel in order to, in the nights and weekends, in order to provide that, that friction. But can Brett or Zach, I guess, generally, if you don't mind going over, like, why did we had to basically sort of keep those 3 travel lanes during the traditional peak periods of vehicle movements?
Sure. I think the word for it is right sizing the road for the times when it needs it. In those peaks that Zach was referring to, where he said it was really peaky, we're trying to provide that when it needs it, but when it doesn't, it's wasted space. And so so we don't need it in the nights and weekends outside of this peak. So yeah, the reason that there will be 3 lanes there is because at this point we will need those 3 lanes. But then when we don't need them, we are going to.
And at this time, this project does not have the funding to rebuild the curb line and remove.
Correct. Yeah,
I mean,
I'll just kind of double back on what Zach had mentioned. This started out originally as just a transit project, not necessarily a full-on corridor project. It started out as a transit project just to improve the operations along here, and it grew because anytime we do these projects, we want to, with the resources that we do have, try to improve the safety and other things, but don't have the amount of resources to be able to rebuild the whole cross section yet. So
yes, so hopefully we can get. This is sort of, I guess, could be considered like an interim until we can, start allocating the proper amount of funding to truly rebuild the corridor. So we do have a couple of general questions for Al. Broadway and Lincoln are Denver roads. They're not CDOT roads. And then for Daniel, Dan Merritt from RTD, if you don't mind, I actually have a question, a couple of questions for you. So I guess there was a comment on the chat saying that, that now that RTD will develop affordable housing, does this affect our plans? And I guess this is based out of the RTD board meeting that happened, I think, earlier this week or late last week, about being able to, take another look at how RTD utilizes their parking. But you guys are not building affordable housing, or Can you speak to that?
I'm not aware of that at this time, but I wasn't at that board meeting, so I cannot speak for what was said there. We have been given no notification that we'll be building any housing at this time. We're a transit company.
And then there was a couple of other questions as well, Dan, regarding, how come, we didn't do this project doesn't do like a 24-hour dedicated bus lane. And that, and I guess this is also for SAC, because during that planning and design process, there was a discussion of how can we sort of, is that what RTD needs? This project at the, it started as, what is needed for the transit for the corridor. And then, as that first movement. And I guess Zach and Dan, can you speak about, sort of what were those discussions at the very beginning of the planning stages, and why a 24-hour bus lane, I guess, it wasn't necessary?
Sure, Gabby. As you know, this is Denver's bus lane, not RTD's bus lane. And we are just here and happy to use what you provide for us. That being said, of course, we'd like every lane to be a bus lane, every street in the city, 24 hours a day. That's not reality though. And what is reality is during off-peak times, there's very insignificant delays compared to during peak hours. And so when we need these lanes the most is during those peaks, as Zach's graph showed, during the morning and the evening. The rest of the time, while we would prefer a bus lane, that maybe isn't in the city's best interests and the residents' best interests. And so we will happily use whatever lane is provided for us.
Yeah, I'd say like that input from RTD, in addition to just all of the feedback that we had received, really made us, just all of the feedback. There was quite a bit of feedback we got during the fall outreach that we did, that really led us to this conclusion. Folks concerned about a variety of issues, including safety and parking, that led us to this conclusion. At one point, we were considering it maybe a 12-hour lane or a 13-hour lane, or there were all options on the table, and just it was RTD, everything that Dan just said, in addition to all the community feedback that we received, led us to this particular solution.
And for the interest of time, we are now going to kick it off to Ms. Ellen, who's going to talk to us about the community transportation South Central, and basically that primarily a lot of them addresses that east-west connections to these other projects. Ms. Ellen?
Great. Thank you, Gabby. And thank you to everyone for being here. I really appreciate you carving out time on a weekday evening to hear all of these great project updates. As I mentioned before, but for folks that joined a little bit later, my name is Ellen Forthofer, and I'm the project manager for the South Central Community Transportation Network. It is a tough act to follow all of these great updates that we've heard tonight, so I will try to keep the updates for the South Central Community Transportation Network pretty high level, and dive into ways that everyone can get involved in the projects that we're working on now. So on the slide that you can see now, just wanted to give a little bit of context about the Community Transportation Network program. It is a new approach that Dottie is using to organize our work more around a connected network of safety improvements, primarily around prioritizing people biking and walking to create a strong network of connections through neighborhoods in Denver, and build out more quickly than we've been able to before those network connections throughout the city of Denver. So South Central Community Network is where we're focusing tonight. But did want to highlight there are 3 community transportation networks that are currently in design and moving towards implementation. South Central is just one of them. There's also the Northwest area, as well as the Central area. And you can find information on all of those transportation network areas at our project website, which is bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. I'll highlight that a little bit later in the presentation. But right now, just really wanted to focus on the South Central area. This is a pretty large area. Roughly, we have boundaries of downtown to the north, Franklin and University Streets to the east, the southern boundary of the city to the south, and Platte River to the west. And we are looking at several neighborhoods in this area and how we can create stronger, more comfortable and safe connections, specifically for people riding bicycles and walking. And on the next slide, I'll talk through the process that these community transportation networks follow. So each project, each corridor within the network goes through each of these benchmarks. And for those of you who aren't able to see the screen, there are 5 large benchmarks that each project follows. The first being confirming the bike network. So that's where we look at the routing of corridors and understanding if there are potential alternatives, what makes the most sense given public feedback, as well as data analysis that we do to understand what is going to be the highest and best connection throughout the network. From there, we develop options and then move into developing a concept design for each corridor. After that, the design goes into a refining process as we finalize and complete the design and then move towards construction and implementation. And it's worth noting that because there are so many projects within the South Central area, some corridors are in different places of this planning process. So I'll speak a little bit later tonight about those different phases of projects. We have some that we're considering phase 1. They are in more of the steps 4 and 5. So completing design and moving towards construction. We anticipate installation for those corridors starting as early as later this year in summer and fall of 2021. Phase 2 projects are a little bit earlier in the process. Some of those just started a little bit later due to the amount of projects that we had going on and just needing to phase things out a bit. Some also had additional analysis that we recognized was needed and just took a little bit longer. So they're still in the first 3 processes here. So really looking at confirming the network and developing that concept design. So those are phase 2 projects. And on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, we are anticipating installation of some projects as early as later this year. So we're looking at 31 total projects throughout the 2-year build out process. We're looking at 17 of those in phase 1 anticipated for construction later this year. And that equates to just over 22 lane miles of bikeways added to the network. You can see those projects listed to the left here. A lot of projects here. They're also highlighted with yellow in the map to the right. And all of these projects are available on our website. You can see the concept designs as well as existing conditions, and for some projects where there's applicable surveys, we also have those linked at our project website. But just want to highlight here, you can see in the map to the right, just in the next year or so, as all of these projects highlighted in yellow come online, part of the benefit of the community transportation network process is being able to look at the connections that these corridors create as a network. So not just the benefits of one corridor alone, but how the corridors work together to create a stronger, more connected and safe network throughout this portion of Denver. And on the next slide, we'll highlight the phase 2 anticipated to begin installation in 2022 projects. Those are highlighted in purple on the map to the right. And just want to touch on the fact, between the yellow and the purple highlights, we're going to be seeing a lot of changes in terms of the connectivity in this network throughout the next 2 years. And the goal, again, here is really to quickly build out these safety improvements that are needed to create that stronger network of connections that align with several of the projects that we've talked through tonight. You can see on the map to the right, Broadway multimodal cycle track is actually highlighted in green, and you can see a lot of these east-west connections that we've been called out tonight. Particularly at 7th to the north, then looking at 2nd Avenue, Virginia, Dakota, as well as oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Bayard, thank you, Bayard. So all of those east-west connections that intersect with Broadway cycle track alone, but you can see that that is a small piece of the larger puzzle of the broader network that we'll be implementing through the South Central Community Network. So on the next slide, Just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, we do have some phase 2 projects that are in that concept development stage. You can see those listed here. We do have surveys open and available. They will be open through the end of March as we head towards our next public meeting opportunity in April. You will find those surveys online as well as updates for the next public meeting opportunity as we have them. We're still working on nailing down that exact date, but we will be updating our website as soon as we have it. And again, that website, you can see it to the right here, is bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. You can also see existing conditions reports, FAQs, as well as the concept designs and other relevant project materials for all projects, not just those listed on this slide that have surveys available. So I do encourage you to check out that website, especially if there's a certain corridor that you're particularly interested in. And on the next slide, I just wanted to close out with the broad program milestones and schedule. As you can see, we started this process earlier last year, really developing the concepts, verifying the network, and now we are moving forward with those phase 1 and phase 2 projects as we pivot towards construction anticipated to start for some projects later this year and for others in 2022. So again, just wanted to highlight the next opportunity for a public meeting will be later this spring in April. And we also have community office hours available. We've had those throughout this process. You can register for one of those office hour sessions with the project team online as well. That's all available at bit.ly/Denver Moves Networks. And so with that, I think we'll open up for the last and largest Q&A of the night. Gabby?
Yes. So thank you, Ellen, for that recap of where CTN is at. So we actually don't have that many questions about CTN. I do want to say that, a comment from Laura. Actually, from Laura itself, I love the Bayard shared street. I live on it and it has truly helped slow down the cars. Will the traffic circle at Bayard and Grant be improved beyond the existing signs? And I guess, Bryce, if you don't mind, would you mind answering this question?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, currently the traffic circle there just has, it only has the signs on the interior with the striping around it. We're going to be adding striping to delineate how vehicles should go around the traffic circle. And that being in the little triangle cones on each approach to kind of veer vehicles off to the side and around in the proper direction.
Gotcha.
Sorry, Gabby, if I can just jump and add to that. I think Bayard is a great and unique example. It was a shared street, and we were able, as the South Central Community Transportation Network, we're able to leverage a unique partnership when the Shared Street Initiative found some funding to formalize some of the improvements on the shared streets on certain corridors. And because we were already moving forward a neighborhood bikeway design for Bayard Avenue, we were able to loop some of those proposed improvements into that formalization that the Shared Street Initiative did. So this is kind of like the 1.5 round of improvements, if you will. There will be additional improvements coming later this year in 2021 to Bayard. One of those improvements being what Bryce spoke to of improving that the traffic circle at Grant. But there will also be additional improvements, and the corridor will actually extend further west to Cherokee. We were only able to install from Lincoln to Downing in this kind of 1.5 round, but I do think it was a good opportunity for us to test out some of the improvements that we're currently designing for neighborhood bikeways and get those improvements out months faster than we would have been able to through the community network alone.
And I guess, yeah, because you kind of read my mind a little bit. So for somebody that wants to understand what, Dottie's version of neighborhood bikeway, it is, would you say that Bayard, obviously we're still changing a couple of things in Bayard, but for this neighborhood, obviously we have the one on 35th bikeway all the way in the Highlands. But if somebody from this neighborhood wants to take a look at what the other neighborhood bikeways could look and feel, should they ride on Bayard?
Yeah, great question. And actually, I don't know if it's possible to pull up. We did have some hidden slides to help us speak to the neighborhood bikeways. So if it's possible, yeah, maybe we can pull up this one. So, you know, Dottie uses a metric of volumes and speeds of vehicles to determine where or what facility type is most appropriate. And the neighborhood bikeway, we're really looking at targeting low volume, low speed streets and adding design elements to ensure that they stay that way. So really looking at keeping vehicle trips on those streets to be local vehicle trips, and the trips that remain of people driving in a car, helping them be slower. So we're looking at a design threshold of 25 miles per hour or less. And on the next slide, you can see some of the examples of what some of those designs are and how we can ensure low volumes of traffic as well as low speeds of traffic. So Bayad is a really good example of a lot of those tools in the toolbox. I do want to note there will be additional improvements. Like for example, in this first round, you know, we have improvements proposed for Bayard and Lincoln. You can see those in the concept map online, but we weren't able to move those forward in this first round of improvements. So we can anticipate to see those later this year. But you'll see things like curb extensions, as well as traffic circles, and particularly on Bayard, we have two aspects of traffic diversion. So that's what helps us keep the trips on the street local and reduce cut through traffic. So you can see those at Bayard and Emerson and Bayard and Lincoln. So I think to your question, Gabby, yes, it's a good example of a street to bike down and to walk down because it is a shared street, to understand how those design elements work to both slow traffic and keep the trips local.
And while I started looking for, more, questions for the rest of the team for all the projects, Ellen, would you mind talking about, there's a discussion on the chat about making a Dakota a shared street, but we've also had requests from various different neighborhoods about, basically moving this forward. So would you mind talking or providing an information on, what is our shared street process? I know that we do have limited funding for those, so it's a little bit different. So,
yeah, it's a great question. So my colleague Jay Decker, he wasn't able to join us tonight, but he's leading the Shared Street Initiative, and I spoke with him on this this topic earlier, and he mentioned, how the shared streets were initially identified was looking citywide at Denver and finding local streets that have strong connections to parks specifically, as well as just strong connections to help people recreate in a socially distant way. As a reminder, the Shared Street program started as a pilot initiative as Dottie recognized that there was a growing need in Denver with the onset of COVID to provide space for people to get outside and to do so safely in a socially distant way. And so looking citywide where those connections are and where we were able to implement the shared streets, that's why we see the shared streets in the places we do today. We have received a lot of positive feedback about this program, and it has been a smashing success, which we're very excited about. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have funding to currently expand, but we are taking that into account and looking at ways that we can continue the themes of these shared streets. And I think it's worth highlighting that neighborhood bikeways are a really good example. And Bayard is a great example to point to of the shared goals of those shared streets and neighborhood bikeways, and how design elements of neighborhood bikeways can really help to create that kind of environment with low traffic volumes as well as low traffic speeds that help to make it a comfortable environment for everybody using it, and really prioritize that local neighborhood street feeling, which is what we're hearing a lot of positive feedback about on the shared streets.
thank you, Ellen. Now I'm gonna try to hit as many. I know that we're a little bit over time, so hopefully as staff can, we can stay for until it's like 7:10ish. So just sort of going back to the Broadway protected bikeway. There were a couple of comments regarding, the current facility that is there is not looking at its greatest. How would this one, be, first of all, sort of the general maintenance of it, and then how, I guess, the current, should people base the design or expect the design to be similar to what it is there right now with the flex post? Or can you remind us sort of like, what is this upgrade that we're getting on the Broadway protected bikeway? James, Brian, or Mike?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So, I guess first remember that was a pilot program, right? And that the corridor that's there now is not connecting a major transit center to one of the major bike arteries in the city, right? So we're providing a new bikeway connection with the South Broadway project. And the improvements we're proposing include permanent concrete separators to protect bicyclists from cars, right? And that's the definite upgrade over flex posts that you may be used to seeing on other bikeway facilities, as well as new signals and new paint and new markings and, a whole new brand new corridor that's, you're gonna have much more visibility for cyclists and increasing safety.
And much more connectivity.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there, for the schedule for the protected, bikeway, we said that we started, we anticipate construction beginning 2022 with a duration of about 12 to 18 months. By any chance, is there, can you give us a little bit better timeline, like when in 2022, early, middle, late, just so that folks can have a good idea?
Well, right. Well, so we certainly have a lot of things to do in front of us, right? And the most difficult of those is the right-of-way acquisition. So we're doing everything we can to kind of start that effort now. But even in doing so, that duration, once we finish final plans, is anticipated to take between up to 12 to 18 months to finish that up. And that's really the last piece we need to put in place before we can then move into construction. And then obviously, you don't just get to put a shovel in the ground the day you have right away. You have to then, once we get all the right away, then we have to put the package out for competitive bid, and that takes time. Then it'll have to go through the approval process. There are a lot of steps in there. So I anticipate probably mid 2022 before we would be getting going.
I guess going to that sort of that construction, Paul has a question about, the bikeway is an admirable project, but it's going to make life a little bit of a nightmare for businesses in terms of access during construction. He has example of the widening median project that was on Broadway several years ago that it took a very long time. So what is the expectancy for the construction? And how do we know at this point, how are we potentially facing it sort of by blocks to lessen the impacts to our business, to the Broadway's merchant community?
So that's an interesting comment, and I can certainly appreciate that, and I know how painful construction can be. Typically, DOTI contracts are awarded to the lowest bidder. And associated with that, we typically do not dictate construction schedules, in phasing. We allow the contractors the flexibility to schedule it how they think is going to be the most advantageous to them so they can provide the lowest price and get it built the quickest. That being said, I do see some merit to this comment. I'll certainly follow up with our contracts department as we get closer to construction to see what tools we might have available to kind of shorten the durations and the impacts to businesses.
An easy question for James. Will there be any bike parking, planned in the corridor?
So as current, we're not planning to add any new bike parking, but all the bike parking that's currently there will be maintained.
We'll maintain and relocate. But obviously we do have the ability, we have, oh shoot, I forgot the name of it. Our parking, it's like rodeo. Oh my gosh.
Corrals.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. We have our bike corral program that is basically our Broadway merchants, if they want an additional one, obviously, we have that program where we can provide and figure out where it can be best installed on the corridor itself. So we're certainly trying to push that information out there. All right, let's see. Let's jump over. Let's see if I can find a question about for Mr. Mike Harmer, really quickly, for I-25 and Broadway. At this point, will there be any, and this is from Gertie, will there be any green growing plantings like trees or even evergreen shrubs added to the project?
Yes, there will be a number of trees that are added. In the section that we're working on along Broadway, you know, a lot of the existing trees are either gone. I guess they're not existing anymore, but or they're in bad shape. As a part of the project, what we're doing is installing the longer tree wells and planting new trees. With the street side stormwater planters that I showed as a part of the Broadway and I-25 presentation, we're including trees. We're also including other vegetation in those specific planters.
Thank you. Another good question for you, Mike. And this is from Paul. What is the primary reason for the reroute of the on-ramp here? Is it capacity? Is it pedestrian access? Just basically the existing ramp is getting close to its expiration date. So would you mind answering that?
I don't mind answering that at all. A large part of the reconfiguration has to do with reducing congestion along the corridor. Many of you may recognize that Broadway serves as a large arterial that serves multiple municipalities throughout the Denver area. What's happening right now is there's inadequate capacity to store vehicles that are trying to get onto I-25. With this new on-ramp, we're providing that storage on the on-ramp itself and taking it off of Broadway, making Broadway run much more efficient and less congested.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I'm looking through all the, trying to figure out which questions have we answered. And I guess a little bit, this is actually for a couple of teammates. There were a couple of questions about basically, how we're installing right now, a lot of the flex posts, right? And painted bulb outs. And obviously, throughout time, with time and because of our seasons, there is this sort of level of sort of wear and tear. So can we get, Ellen, and I think that you had addressed this question before in some other meetings that you and I have been together, but can you talk a little bit about sort of, these improvements? Why do we, basically we're sort of rolling out with so many flex posts out there, and the level, the maintenance that they take care of, and, is this interim before we can actually rebuild the curb line? Like, what is the approach for Dottie and all of these bikeway project teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think at the core of the answer is that safety is the priority for Dottie in all of our bike projects and our pedestrian safety projects as well. Given our constrained budgets, using materials like paint and post, so using bollards as well as pavement markings similar to what was installed on Bayard Avenue, allow us to more quickly and in more areas get those safety improvements out faster and on a network scale. And so the community networks are using materials like bollards and pavement markings similar to what's on Bayard, because it allows us to get those necessary safety improvements and prioritize people biking throughout the network much faster than we'd be able to otherwise. I do think it's worth noting, Dottie does look at streets from an iterative approach, recognizing that there are always opportunities to seek greater funding to then more formalized projects. But as part of the community network right now, that is not where we're at in the phase currently. We are looking at paint and post and how we can quickly get these safety improvements out in places that need them and build out a stronger, more connected network much faster than we would be able to on a corridor by corridor approach.
And I guess, Ellen, back to you really quickly, and just to, we have 2 minutes and I want to ask this question and then one more. There's a couple of discussion on the chat about Sherman. So, basically not, we're building this really great facility. And so what are the, I guess, you know, we're trying to build this bike network the same way that we have our road network, where we have the arterials, collectors, and local streets, right? So what would be the parallel local streets that are for, you know, but that will complement the Broadway? There's a couple of discussions about Sherman, but I actually don't think that Sherman is on either side, or am I wrong?
So there are projects on Sherman, not in this area particularly, on
But north of Spear, correct?
On North Sherman, we're looking at a protected bike lane from Colfax to 20th, and then South Sherman from Mississippi down to, I'm forgetting the southern extent right now, my apologies, but south of I-25, we're looking at a neighborhood bikeway. In this area, in terms of those parallel north-south connections within the neighborhoods, we will see Pearl Street as well as a little bit further north connections via Emerson and Pearl Streets through Cap Hill. West of Broadway, north-south connections, we're looking at Cherokee Street, for example. And then I feel like I'm forgetting one. Bryce, feel free to jump in.
I think you're right. I think it's just in these two is the closest one would be Pearl, because I'm looking at the map right now. Yeah, you're right. It's Pearl, and then it's Cherokee on the other side. I mean, there's one over that we're also looking at Galapago.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's the other one going over. And then, yes, Britt had a really fabulous question out there. Would it be an option to put a semi-temporary diagonal striping or artwork on the road to really show which streets are shared versus standard streets? So aside, you know, we talked a little bit about that placemaking element, but is there an opportunity to add like physically on the ground elements, or is there something that the community can do to enhance the you know, these bikeways?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, I would defer that to my colleague Jay with the Shared Street Initiative program. I know he was looking at different ways and opportunities to do just that, but particularly to the neighborhood bikeways, which I think are the facility type closest to that Shared Street Initiative pilot. You know, as we see on Bayard, lots of shared goals there and similar design tools in our toolbox to make that happen. Pavement markings are a part of neighborhood bikeways. So looking at, you know, sharrows to note the fact that there isn't a separated bike lane on neighborhood bikeways, but rather through design elements like diversion as well as traffic calming designs, it is a shared condition for people biking and people driving. There's also additional pavement markings, particularly as you lead into the traffic circles. Those will be installed to help better delineate the space and you know, show that it is a different treatment at this intersection and on this street throughout the corridor. So those are some examples of markings that are used. I know that doesn't specifically answer Brittany's question. I think she was speaking more to specific to shared streets. But I would defer to Jay there in the Shared Street Initiative. I know he was looking at options, but unfortunately, I'm certain where he landed on that.
Yeah, and Brady, I can provide you, obviously you and I can connect via email, but I can provide you Jay. And I do know that Jay is working, you know, on the Northwest and then the Westwood neighborhood to try to figure out how to, again, bring that sort of that placemaking component to these. So, and with that, I am going to, you know, we are 17 sort of minutes over, and I appreciate everybody sticking around. We do have a couple of questions that we were not able to answer, but we will transcribe, you know, a response to it and obviously post it. If you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Oh, technical difficulties. No. Oh no, what happened? All right. I'm not sure what happened. Sorry, eventually the next slide, well, there we go. These are all the emails from they went back from the project team. So definitely feel free if you have additional questions, comments, please, you know, reach out to the team. Hopefully we can get back to that slide. This presentation, the recording for this presentation will be available on the Dottie's YouTube page. And then also we'll be posting the slide deck for this as well under our plans and programs. And we sincerely thank you for taking close to 2 hours to talk to to get informed about what's happening in your neighborhood and to ask your questions. There we go. So definitely, please feel free to reach out with any additional questions that you may have to the project team. Thank you so much for joining us today. I certainly appreciate it. So, all right, we're gonna leave that in there for a little bit, and I might play some La La Land again. Never mind, I don't have my Spotify. I don't know what happened. All right, so hopefully.